David was a man in his early 70s, living a quiet and modest life in a small town on the outskirts of London. His days were simple, filled with routines that revolved around tending to his small garden, reading old books, and reminiscing about the past. His home, a quaint little house with peeling paint and a creaky wooden door, was a reflection of his life. Humble, yet full of character. It was a place that held memories of his late wife, who had passed away years ago, and his only son, Jack, who had grown up to become a successful businessman in the bustling city of London. David had always been a man of principle. He believed in hard work, honesty, and the value of perseverance. These were the values he had instilled in Jack, raising him single-handedly after his wife's untimely death. Life had not been easy for David. He had worked countless jobs, sometimes as a mechanic, other times as a delivery man, just to ensure that Jack could have a better future. And Jack had not disappointed him. Now a CEO of a thriving tech company, Jack was the pride of David's life. Despite Jack's success, David remained grounded. He never asked for anything from his son, content with the simple life he had built for himself. But there was one dream that David had carried with him for decades, a dream that he had never shared with anyone, not even Jack. It was a dream that seemed almost absurd for a man of his background, owning a Rolls-Royce. To David, the Rolls-Royce was not just a car. It was a symbol of achievement, of dignity, and of the countless sacrifices he had made throughout his life. He had first seen one when he was a young man working as a valet at a luxury hotel. The sleek design, the quiet hum of the engine, and the aura of sophistication it exuded had left an indelible mark on him. From that moment on, he had promised himself that one day he would own a car like that, not to show off, but as a testament to his journey and his resilience. For years, the dream had remained just that, a dream. But everything changed one evening when Jack came to visit him. "Dad, you've done so much for me," Jack said, sitting across from David in the cozy living room. The room was dimly lit, with the soft glow of a table lamp casting shadows on the walls. "It's time you did something for yourself. Is there anything you've always wanted? Anything at all?" David hesitated. He wasn't used to thinking about his own desires. His life had always been about providing for Jack, not indulging in his own wishes. But Jack's question lingered in his mind long after their conversation ended. A few days later, David finally mustered the courage to tell Jack about his dream. "I've always wanted a Rolls-Royce," he admitted, his voice tinged with both excitement and embarrassment. "I know it sounds ridiculous, but it's something I've dreamed of for a long time."
Jack didn't laugh or dismiss his father's words.
Instead, he smiled warmly. "Dad, that's not ridiculous at all. You deserve it. Let's make it happen." David was taken aback by Jack's enthusiasm. He had expected his son to brush off the idea, but Jack was determined. He insisted on taking David to a Rolls-Royce showroom in London, promising to help him fulfill his lifelong dream. The day finally arrived. David woke up early, his heart racing with a mix of excitement and nervousness. He chose his best outfit, a simple shirt and a pair of trousers that Jack had bought for him years ago. Over it, he wore an old but well-kept coat, one that had seen many winters but still held its shape. As he stepped out of his house, a taxi was already waiting for him. Jack had arranged everything, ensuring that his father wouldn't have to worry about a thing. The ride to London was long, but David didn't mind. He spent most of the journey gazing out of the window, watching the countryside give way to the towering skyscrapers of the city. The closer they got to the showroom, the more his nerves began to take over. "Are you sure about this, sir?" the taxi driver asked, glancing at David through the rearview mirror. David nodded firmly. "Yes, I'm sure."
The driver didn't say anything more, but David could sense the doubt in his eyes.
It was a look he had seen many times before, a look that questioned his worth, his ability, his place in a world that seemed so far removed from his own. When they finally arrived at the showroom, David stepped out of the taxi and took a deep breath. The building was sleek and modern, with large glass windows that offered a glimpse of the luxury cars inside. Each car seemed to gleam under the bright showroom lights, their polished surfaces reflecting the opulence of their surroundings. David hesitated for a moment before walking through the glass doors. As he entered, he felt a wave of self-consciousness wash over him. The showroom was filled with well-dressed customers and staff, all of whom seemed to belong to a different world. David's simple attire and weathered face stood out in stark contrast to the elegance around him, but he reminded himself why he was there. This wasn't about fitting in or impressing anyone. This was about fulfilling a promise he had made to himself all those years ago. Inside the showroom, a young woman named Sarah approached him. She was dressed impeccably, her sharp suit and polished demeanor exuding professionalism. But the moment her eyes landed on David, her expression shifted ever so slightly. "Good afternoon, sir," she said, her tone polite but lacking warmth. "How can I assist you today?" David smiled, trying to mask his nervousness. "I'd like to see the Rolls-Royce Phantom," he said. Sarah raised an eyebrow, her gaze quickly scanning him from head to toe. "The Phantom?" she repeated as if to confirm she had heard him correctly. "Yes," David replied, his voice steady. For a moment, Sarah said nothing. Then, with a tight-lipped smile, she gestured toward the car. "Of course, right this way." As David followed her, he couldn't shake the feeling that she was judging him. Her tone, her body language, even the way she glanced at him, it all carried an air of skepticism. But David chose to ignore it. He wasn't here to seek her approval. When they reached the Phantom, Sarah began explaining its features, her words rehearsed and mechanical. David listened intently, his eyes fixed on the car. It was even more beautiful up close than he had imagined. But just as he was about to ask a question, Sarah interrupted him. "Sir, I hope you understand that this car is quite expensive," she said, her voice laced with condescension. "Perhaps you'd like to look at something more affordable." David felt a pang of humiliation, but he kept his composure. "I know how much it costs," he said calmly. "I've done my research." Sarah's smile didn't reach her eyes. "I see. Well, in that case, we'll need to discuss financing options. Do you have proof of income or a bank statement with you?" David's heart sank. He had expected to be treated with respect, but instead he was being questioned as if he didn't belong there. David's journey to the Rolls-Royce showroom began early in the morning, long before the city of London had fully awakened. The air was crisp, and the faint glow of the rising sun painted the sky in hues of orange and pink. For a man who had spent most of his life in the quiet countryside, the thought of venturing into the bustling heart of London was both exciting and intimidating. He had barely slept the night before, his mind racing with thoughts of what the day would bring. It wasn't just the idea of seeing the car he had dreamed of for decades, it was the weight of the moment itself. This was more than just a trip to a showroom. It was a culmination of years of hard work, sacrifice, and perseverance. David stood in front of the small mirror in his bedroom, carefully adjusting the collar of his shirt. He had chosen his best outfit for the occasion, a neatly pressed white shirt, a pair of dark trousers, and an old but well-maintained coat. The coat had been a gift from Jack many years ago, and though it was no longer in fashion, it held sentimental value for David. As he looked at his reflection, he couldn't help but feel a twinge of self-doubt. "Do I really belong in a place like that?" he thought to himself. But then he remembered Jack's words from the night before. "Dad, you've earned this. Don't let anyone make you feel otherwise." With a deep breath, David grabbed his hat and stepped outside. A taxi was already waiting for him at the end of the driveway, its engine idling softly. Jack had arranged everything, ensuring that his father wouldn't have to worry about a thing. The taxi driver, a young man named Liam, greeted David with a friendly smile. "Good morning, sir. Headed to London, I hear?" David nodded as he settled into the back seat. "Yes, to the Rolls-Royce showroom?" Liam's eyebrows raised slightly, but he quickly masked his surprise. "Ah, Rolls-Royce. Beautiful cars, those. You must be excited." "I am," David replied, his voice steady but tinged with nervousness. The car pulled away from the driveway, and the familiar sights of David's small town began to fade into the distance. The journey to London was long, but the changing scenery kept David's mind occupied. Rolling green fields gave way to suburban neighborhoods, and soon the towering skyscrapers of the city came into view. As they approached the outskirts of London, Liam glanced at David through the rearview mirror. "If you don't mind me asking, sir, are you planning to buy a Rolls-Royce today?" David hesitated for a moment before answering. "That's the plan," he said with a small smile. Liam nodded, though his expression betrayed a hint of skepticism. "Well, good luck to you, sir. Those cars are something else. I've only ever seen them in magazines." David didn't respond, but he could feel the weight of Liam's unspoken doubts. It wasn't the first time someone had underestimated him, and he knew it wouldn't be the last. But he had learned long ago not to let other people's opinions define him. The taxi finally arrived at the showroom, a sleek and modern building with large glass windows that reflected the morning sunlight. The Rolls-Royce logo, a symbol of luxury and prestige, was prominently displayed above the entrance. Liam parked the car and turned to David. "Here we are, sir. Best of luck in there." David thanked him, paid the fare, and stepped out of the taxi. As he stood in front of the showroom, he took a moment to steady himself. The building was imposing, and the sight of it made his heart race. He adjusted his coat, straightened his hat, and walked toward the entrance. The glass doors slid open silently, and David stepped inside. The interior of the showroom was even more impressive than he had imagined. The floors were polished to a mirror-like shine, and the walls were adorned with photographs of Rolls-Royce cars in various settings, gliding through city streets, cruising along coastal roads, and parked in front of grand mansions. The cars themselves were displayed like works of art, each one positioned under a spotlight that highlighted its flawless design. David's eyes were immediately drawn to a Rolls-Royce Phantom, its sleek black exterior gleaming under the showroom lights. For a moment, he forgot about his nerves. He forgot about the doubts, the stares, and the judgments he had faced throughout his life. All he could see was the car he had dreamed of for so long, but his reverie was interrupted by the sound of footsteps approaching. "Good morning, sir," a voice said. David turned to see a young woman dressed in a sharp black suit. Her name tag read Sarah. She smiled politely, though there was a hint of hesitation in her expression. "Welcome to Rolls-Royce. How can I assist you today?" David returned her smile. "Good morning. I'd like to see the Rolls-Royce Phantom." Sarah's smile faltered for a brief moment, but she quickly recovered. "Of course, sir. Right this way." As she led him toward the car, David couldn't help but notice the way she glanced at him out of the corner of her eye. It was a look he had seen many times before, a look that questioned his presence in a place like this. When they reached the Phantom, Sarah began explaining its features. Her tone was professional, but there was an undercurrent of skepticism in her voice. "This is the Rolls-Royce Phantom," she said, gesturing toward the car. "It's one of our most luxurious models with a starting price of £400,000. It features a V12 engine, handcrafted interiors, and state-of-the-art technology." David listened intently, his eyes fixed on the car. He reached out to touch the door handle, but Sarah quickly stepped in. "Sir, I hope you understand that this is a very high-end vehicle," she said, her tone slightly condescending. "Perhaps you'd like to look at something more accessible?" David felt a pang of humiliation, but he kept his composure. "I know how much it costs," he said calmly. "I've done my research." Sarah's smile didn't reach her eyes. "I see. Well, in that case, we'll need to discuss financing options. Do you have proof of income or a bank statement with you?" David's heart sank. He had expected to be treated with respect, but instead, he was being questioned as if he didn't belong there. As the conversation continued, David's excitement began to wane. The car he had dreamed of for so long was right in front of him, but the experience was far from what he had imagined. Still, he reminded himself why he was there. This wasn't about Sarah or her judgments. This was about fulfilling a promise he had made to himself all those years ago. With a steady voice, he said, "I'd like to take a closer look at the interior, if that's all right." Sarah hesitated for a moment before nodding. "Of course, sir. Let me unlock it for you." As she reached for the key, David took a deep breath. He knew this was just the beginning of what would be a long and challenging day. David stood in the middle of the Rolls-Royce showroom, his eyes fixed on the sleek black Phantom that had captured his imagination for decades. The car was everything he had dreamed of, elegant, powerful, and a symbol of resilience. But as he admired the vehicle, he couldn't help but notice the glances from the staff. Their eyes darted toward him, filled with curiosity, skepticism, and in some cases, thinly veiled judgment. He adjusted his coat, straightened his back, and took a deep breath. He had come too far to let anyone's opinion deter him now. "Excuse me," he said, approaching the reception desk where a young woman sat. Her name tag read Sarah. She looked up from her computer, her expression polite but distant. "Good afternoon, sir. How can I assist you today?" she asked, her tone professional but lacking warmth. David smiled gently. "I'd like to see the Rolls-Royce Phantom," he said. For a moment, Sarah's expression froze. Her eyes flicked over his appearance, the worn coat, the scuffed shoes, the weathered hands that spoke of a lifetime of hard work. She quickly masked her reaction with a tight-lipped smile. "Of course, sir," she said, standing up. "Right this way." As Sarah led him toward the car, David could feel her glancing at him out of the corner of her eye. Her movements were precise, her words rehearsed, but there was an undercurrent of doubt in her demeanor. "This is the Rolls-Royce Phantom," she began, gesturing toward the car. "It's one of our most luxurious models with a starting price of £400,000. It features a V12 engine, handcrafted interiors, and state-of-the-art technology." David nodded, his eyes fixed on the car. He reached out to touch the door handle, but Sarah quickly stepped in. "Sir, I hope you understand that this is a very high-end vehicle," she said, her tone slightly condescending. "Perhaps you'd like to look at something more accessible?" David felt a pang of humiliation, but he kept his composure. "I know how much it costs," he said calmly. "I've done my research." Sarah's smile didn't reach her eyes. "I see. Well, in that case, we'll need to discuss financing options. Do you have proof of income or a bank statement with you?" David's heart sank. He had expected to be treated with respect, but instead he was being questioned as if he didn't belong there. "I'm not here to discuss financing," he said, his voice steady. "I'm here to see the car." Sarah hesitated, her smile faltering. "Of course, sir," she said, stepping aside. "Feel free to take a closer look." David opened the door of the Phantom and peered inside. The interior was even more stunning than he had imagined. Soft leather seats, polished wood accents, and a dashboard that seemed to glow with understated elegance. For a moment he allowed himself to dream, to imagine what it would feel like to sit behind the wheel of this masterpiece. But his reverie was interrupted by Sarah's voice. "Sir, I hope you understand that this car is not just a vehicle," she said. "It's a statement. It's for people who appreciate the finer things in life." David turned to her, his expression calm but firm. "I understand that very well," he said. "That's why I'm here." Sarah's smile grew tighter. "I see. Well, if you're serious about purchasing, we'll need to verify your financial standing. It's standard procedure for a car of this caliber." David's patience was wearing thin. "I don't need to prove anything to you," he said. "If you don't want to help me, perhaps I should speak to someone else." Sarah's eyes widened slightly, but she quickly recovered. "Of course, sir," she said, her tone icy. "I'll fetch the manager." As Sarah walked away, David stood by the car, his hands resting on the door. He could feel the weight of the stares from other staff and customers. He had faced judgment and prejudice many times in his life, but it never got easier. He thought of Jack's words. "That morning, you've earned this, Dad. Don't let anyone make you feel otherwise." David straightened his back and waited. He wasn't going to let anyone take this moment away from him. A few minutes later, Sarah returned, but instead of bringing the manager, she continued the conversation herself. "Sir, I've spoken to my manager," she said, her tone still laced with skepticism. "But before we proceed, we really need to ensure that you're serious about this purchase. We can't have people wasting our time." David's jaw tightened. He looked at her, his eyes filled with quiet determination. "I've worked hard my entire life," he said, his voice steady. "I've earned the right to be here, just like anyone else. If you can't see that, then perhaps you're in the wrong line of work." Sarah blinked, momentarily taken aback by his words. But before she could respond, the glass doors of the showroom slid open and a tall, well-dressed man entered. Jack strode into the showroom, his tailored suit and confident demeanor immediately commanding attention. His eyes scanned the room until they landed on his father, standing by the Phantom. "Dad!" he called out, his voice warm but firm. David turned, a mixture of relief and pride washing over him. "Jack," he said, his voice soft. Jack walked over to his father, his presence drawing the attention of everyone in the showroom. He placed a hand on David's shoulder and turned to Sarah. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, his tone polite but edged with authority. Sarah hesitated, her confidence faltering under Jack's gaze. "No, sir," she said quickly. "I was just assisting your father." Jack's eyes narrowed. "Assisting him? It doesn't look like that to me." Sarah opened her mouth to respond, but Jack cut her off. "My father came here to see this car," he said, his voice calm but firm, "and instead of treating him with the respect he deserves, you've been questioning his intentions and judging him based on his appearance. Is that how you treat all your customers?" Sarah's face turned red. I didn't mean to." Jack held up a hand, silencing her. "Save your excuses," he said. "My father doesn't need to prove anything to you or anyone else. He's the reason I'm standing here today, and he's more than earned the right to be treated with respect." The room fell silent. Other staff members and customers watched the scene unfold, their expressions ranging from curiosity to discomfort. At that moment, the showroom manager, Michael, appeared. He was a middle-aged man with a polished demeanor and a practiced smile. "Good afternoon," he said, addressing Jack. "I'm Michael, the manager here. Is there a problem?" Jack turned to him, his expression cold. "Yes, there is," he said. "Your staff has been treating my father as if he doesn't belong here, and I want to know why." Michael's smile faltered. He glanced at David, then back at Jack. "I sincerely apologize if there's been any misunderstanding," he said. "I assure you, we value all our customers." Jack's eyes narrowed. "Do you? Because it doesn't seem that way." Michael hesitated, clearly unsure of how to handle the situation. "I'll personally ensure that your father receives the best service from now on," he said. Jack shook his head. "It's too late for that," he said. "Respect isn't something you can offer after the fact. It's something you show from the beginning." David placed a hand on Jack's arm, his voice gentle. "It's all right, Jack," he said. "I don't need the car anymore. Let's go." Jack looked at his father, his expression softening. "Are you sure, Dad?" David nodded. "I've lived long enough to know that respect doesn't come from material things. Let's leave." With that, the two of them turned and walked out of the showroom, leaving behind a room full of stunned silence. David stood silently by the Rolls-Royce Phantom, his hand resting on the smooth, polished surface of the car. The weight of the moment pressed heavily on him. He had come here with hope, with a dream that had carried him through decades of hard work and sacrifice. Yet the way he had been treated, the condescension, the judgment, the subtle but unmistakable dismissal, had left him feeling small, as though he didn't belong in this world of luxury and opulence. He glanced around the showroom. The other customers, dressed in tailored suits and designer dresses, moved confidently between the cars, chatting with sales staff who greeted them with warm smiles and attentive service. David, in his simple coat and worn shoes, felt like an outsider. Sarah, the saleswoman who had been assisting him, or rather interrogating him, stood a few feet away, speaking in hushed tones with another staff member. Every now and then, she glanced in David's direction, her expression a mix of discomfort and impatience. David sighed. He had faced many challenges in his life, but this was different. This wasn't about hard work or perseverance. This was about dignity, about being seen and respected for who he was, not for what he looked like or what others assumed about him. Just as he was about to turn and leave, the glass doors of the showroom slid open with a soft hiss. A tall, well-dressed man stepped inside, his presence immediately commanding attention. It was Jack. Jack's arrival was like a gust of fresh air cutting through the tension in the room. Dressed in a perfectly tailored navy blue suit, with polished leather shoes and a confident stride, he exuded an aura of authority and success. His sharp features and piercing gaze made it clear that he was not someone to be underestimated. As he entered, his eyes scanned the showroom, searching for his father. When he spotted David standing by the Phantom, his expression softened. He walked briskly toward him, his footsteps echoing on the polished floor. "Dad!" Jack called out, his voice warm but firm. David turned, his face lighting up with a mixture of relief and pride. "Jack?" he said softly. Jack reached his father, and placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "Are you all right?" he asked, his tone gentle but laced with concern. David hesitated, glancing towards Sarah and the other staff members who were now watching the scene unfold with growing unease. "I'm fine," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. Jack's eyes narrowed as he followed his father's gaze. He could sense that something was wrong. Turning to Sarah, he addressed her directly. "Excuse me," he said, his voice calm but edged with authority. "Is there a problem here?" Sarah blinked, clearly caught off guard. "No, sir," she said quickly, her tone suddenly much more polite. "I was just assisting your father." Jack raised an eyebrow. "Assisting him?" he repeated, his voice dripping with skepticism. "It doesn't look like that to me." Sarah opened her mouth to respond, but Jack didn't give her the chance. "My father came here to see this car," he said, gesturing toward the Phantom. "And instead of treating him with the respect he deserves, you've been questioning his intentions and judging him based on his appearance. Is that how you treat all your customers?" The room fell silent. Other staff members and customers had stopped what they were doing to watch the confrontation. Sarah's face turned red, and she stammered as she tried to explain herself. I didn't mean to." Jack held up a hand, cutting her off. "Save your excuses," he said sharply. "My father doesn't need to prove anything to you or anyone else. He's the reason I'm standing here today, and he's more than earned the right to be treated with respect." David placed a hand on Jack's arm, his voice gentle. "Jack, it's all right," he said. "I don't want to cause a scene," but Jack shook his head. "No, Dad, this isn't all right. You've worked too hard and sacrificed too much to be treated like this. They need to understand that." At that moment, the showroom manager, Michael, appeared. He was a middle-aged man with a polished demeanor and a practiced smile. "Good afternoon," Michael said, addressing Jack. "I'm Michael, the manager here. Is there a problem?" Jack turned to him, his expression cold. "Yes, there is," he said. "Your staff has been treating my father as if he doesn't belong here, and I want to know why." Michael's smile faltered. He glanced at Sarah, who looked down at the floor, then back at Jack. "I sincerely apologize if there's been any misunderstanding," he said. "I assure you we value all our customers." Jack's eyes narrowed. "Do you? Because it doesn't seem that way." Michael hesitated, clearly unsure of how to handle the situation. "I'll personally ensure that your father receives the best service from now on," he said. Jack shook his head. "It's too late for that," he said. "Respect isn't something you can offer after the fact. It's something you show from the beginning." David watched the exchange in silence, his emotions a mix of pride and discomfort. He appreciated Jack's support, but he didn't want to escalate the situation further. "Jack," he said softly, "let's just go. I don't need the car anymore." Jack turned to his father, his expression softening. "Are you sure, Dad?" David nodded. "I've lived long enough to know that respect doesn't come from material things. Let's leave." Jack hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "All right, Dad, let's go." As the two of them turned to leave, Michael stepped forward, his voice urgent. "Please wait," he said. "I'd like to make this right." Jack stopped and looked at him. "You had your chance," he said, "but you failed. My father deserves better than this." With that, Jack and David walked out of the showroom, leaving behind a room full of stunned silence. Outside, the air was cool and refreshing, a stark contrast to the tension inside the showroom. David took a deep breath, feeling a sense of relief wash over him. "Thank you, Jack," he said, his voice filled with gratitude. Jack smiled and placed a hand on his father's shoulder. "You don't have to thank me, Dad," he said. "You've always taught me to stand up for what's right. I'm just following your example." David smiled, his heart swelling with pride. In that moment, he realized that the true measure of his success wasn't the car he had dreamed of owning, it was the man his son had become. The air outside the showroom was crisp and cool, a welcome contrast to the stifling tension that had filled the room moments earlier. David and Jack walked side by side down the street, their footsteps echoing softly against the pavement. For a while, neither of them spoke. David's mind was a whirlwind of emotions, relief, disappointment, and a lingering sense of humiliation. Jack, on the other hand, was still fuming. His jaw was tight, and his hands were clenched into fists at his sides. He couldn't believe the way his father had been treated. To him, David was the most honorable man he knew, A man who had worked tirelessly to provide for his family, who had sacrificed his own dreams so that Jack could achieve his. The thought of anyone looking down on his father, of questioning his worth, made Jack's blood boil. "Dad," Jack said finally, breaking the silence. "I'm sorry you had to go through that. You didn't deserve it." David shook his head, a small, weary smile on his face. "It's all right, Jack," he said. "I've faced worse in my life. This isn't the first time someone's judged me by my appearance, and it won't be the last." "But it's not right," Jack said, his voice firm. "You've earned the right to be treated with respect. They had no idea who they were dealing with." David chuckled softly. "Maybe that's the problem," he said. "People shouldn't need to know who you are to treat you with respect. It should be given freely, to everyone." Jack nodded, his father's words sinking in. "You're right," he said. "But that doesn't mean we should let them get away with it." As they continued walking, Jack's phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out and glanced at the screen. It was an unknown number. "Hello," he said, answering the call. "Good afternoon," a voice said on the other end. "This is Michael, the manager of the Rolls-Royce showroom. I'm calling to apologize for what happened earlier." Jack's expression hardened. "An apology?" he said, his tone cold. "You think a phone call is enough to make up for the way my father was treated?" Michael hesitated. "I understand your frustration, Mr. Jack," he said, "and I take full responsibility for what happened. I assure you, this is not how we usually treat our customers. I'd like to invite you and your father back to the showroom so we can make things right." Jack glanced at his father, who was watching him curiously. "I don't think my father is interested in coming back," Jack said. "You had your chance to treat him with respect and you failed." "Please," Michael said, his voice earnest. "I know we made a mistake, but I'd like the opportunity to fix it. Your father deserves better, and I want to make sure he gets the experience he should have had from the start." Jack hesitated. He didn't trust Michael's intentions, but he also didn't want his father's dream to end on such a sour note. "I'll talk to my father," Jack said finally, "but I'm not making any promises." "Thank you," Michael said, "and please let him know how deeply sorry we are." After ending the call, Jack turned to David and explained what had happened. David listened quietly, his expression thoughtful. "What do you think, Dad?" Jack asked. "Do you want to go back?" David was silent for a moment, then he sighed. "I don't know, Jack," he said. "Part of me wants to leave it behind, to move on, but another part of me feels like I should give them a chance to make it right." Jack nodded. "It's up to you, Dad. Whatever you decide, I'll support you." David thought for a moment longer, then he nodded. "All right," he said. "Let's go back. But not for them, for me. I want to see this through." When they returned to the showroom, Michael was waiting for them at the entrance. His demeanor was completely different from before. Gone was the polished, detached professionalism. Instead, he looked genuinely contrite, his posture slightly hunched and his expression earnest. "Mr. David, Mr. Jack," he said, stepping forward to greet them. "Thank you for giving us another chance. I want to start by saying how deeply sorry I am for the way you were treated earlier. It was unacceptable, and I take full responsibility." David nodded but said nothing, his expression calm but unreadable. Michael continued, "I've spoken to the staff involved, and I've made it clear that this kind of behavior will not be tolerated. We pride ourselves on providing exceptional service to all our customers, and we failed to do that today. I can't change what happened, but I'd like to do everything I can to make it right." David glanced at Jack, who gave him a small nod. "All right," David said finally. "Let's see what you have to offer." Michael personally led them to the Phantom, explaining its features in detail. This time there was no condescension, no skepticism, only genuine enthusiasm and respect. He invited David to sit in the driver's seat, to feel the leather steering wheel and admire the craftsmanship of the interior. David's eyes lit up as he explored the car, his earlier disappointment slowly giving way to excitement. For the first time that day, he allowed himself to fully enjoy the experience. As Michael continued his presentation, Sarah approached them, her expression nervous. She hesitated for a moment before speaking. "Mr. David," she said, her voice soft, "I want to apologize for the way I treated you earlier. I was wrong to judge you, and I'm truly sorry." David looked at her, his expression thoughtful. "Thank you," he said simply. "I hope you've learned something from this." "I have," Sarah said, her voice earnest. "And I'll do better in the future." By the time they left the showroom, David's mood had shifted completely. He felt a sense of closure, of having reclaimed his dignity. As they walked back to the car, Jack turned to his father. "So, what do you think, Dad? Are you going to buy it?" David chuckled. "Not today," he said, "but maybe someday. For now, I'm just happy to know that I stood my ground." Jack smiled, his heart swelling with pride. "You're incredible, Dad," he said. David placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "And so are you, Jack. I couldn't have done this without you." The day after their visit to the Rolls-Royce showroom, Jack sat in his office, staring at his computer screen. The events of the previous day replayed in his mind like a film. He couldn't shake the image of his father standing in the middle of that luxurious showroom, his dignity challenged by the judgmental attitudes of others. Jack had always admired his father's resilience, but seeing him endure such treatment had stirred something deep within him, a need to share his father's story with the world. It wasn't just about the car or the showroom. It was about the values his father had instilled in him: perseverance, humility, and the belief that a person's worth could never be measured by their appearance or possessions. With a deep breath, Jack began typing. The post started simply, "Yesterday, I witnessed something that broke my heart but also filled me with pride. My father, a man who has sacrificed everything for me, walked into a Rolls-Royce showroom to fulfill a lifelong dream. But instead of being treated with respect, he was judged by his appearance and dismissed as someone who didn't belong there." Jack paused, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. He wanted to get this right. He wanted people to understand the depth of his father's journey, the sacrifices he had made, and the strength it took for him to walk into that showroom with his head held high. He continued, "My father is not a man of wealth or luxury. He is a man of hard work, of sacrifice, of love. He spent his entire life working tirelessly to give me opportunities he never had. He taught me the value of perseverance, of never giving up, even when the world looks down on you. Yesterday, he walked into that showroom not to show off, but to honor the life he has lived and the struggles he has overcome." Jack's words flowed easily now, his emotions guiding him. He described the confrontation with the staff, the way his father had been treated and how it had made him feel. But he also wrote about the lessons his father had taught him, the importance of self-respect, of standing tall in the face of prejudice, and of never letting others define your worth. He ended the post with a powerful message. True class is not about the car you drive or the clothes you wear. It's about how you treat others, especially those who may not look like they belong. My father didn't need a Rolls-Royce to prove his worth, but I hope this story serves as a reminder that everyone deserves respect, no matter where they come from or what they look like." Satisfied, Jack hit post. Within hours, the story began to spread. At first, it was shared by friends and colleagues, many of whom left comments expressing their admiration for David and their outrage at how he had been treated. "Your father is an inspiration," one comment read. "This is a powerful reminder of what really matters in life," wrote another. But soon, the post began to gain traction beyond Jack's immediate circle. Influential figures in the business world shared it, praising the values it highlighted. Social media users from all walks of life resonated with the story, sharing their own experiences of being judged or underestimated. By the end of the day, the post had gone viral. It had been shared tens of thousands of times, with comments pouring in from around the world. The next morning, Jack woke up to find his phone flooded with notifications. News outlets had picked up the story, and journalists were reaching out for interviews. Headlines like "A Father's Dignity," "The Story Behind a Viral Post," and "CEO Shares Heartwarming Story of His Father's Perseverance" began appearing online. Even Rolls-Royce's official social media account had responded to the post. "We are deeply sorry for the experience Mr. David had at one of our showrooms. This is not reflective of our values as a brand. We are committed to ensuring that every customer is treated with the respect they deserve. We have reached out to Mr. David and his family to make amends and learn from this incident." The apology was accompanied by a promise to improve staff training and customer service policies. Meanwhile, back in his small, modest home, David was unaware of the storm his story had created. He spent his morning as he always did, watering the plants in his garden, sipping tea by the window, and reflecting on the simple joys of life. It wasn't until Jack arrived later that day, his face alight with excitement, that David learned what had happened. "Dad," Jack said, holding up his phone, "you're famous." David frowned, confused. "What are you talking about?" Jack handed him the phone, showing him the post and the thousands of comments it had received. David's eyes widened as he scrolled through the messages of support and admiration. "I didn't do anything special," he said quietly, handing the phone back to his son. "You did, Dad," Jack said, his voice filled with emotion. "You showed the world what true strength and dignity look like. People are inspired by you." David shook his head, a small smile on his face. "If my story can help others, then I'm glad. But I didn't do it for fame or recognition. I just wanted to live my life with integrity." As the days passed, the story continued to gain momentum. People from all over the world reached out to Jack and David, sharing their own stories of perseverance and resilience. Some were inspired to stand up for themselves in situations where they had been underestimated. Others were moved to reflect on how they treated those around them. Even Rolls-Royce took further action. The company invited David and Jack to a special event at their headquarters, where they presented David with a personalized letter of apology and a commemorative plaque honoring his story. But David, true to his humble nature, declined any grand gestures. "I don't need a plaque or a ceremony," he said. "All I want is for people to treat each other with kindness and respect."
The story's impact extended far beyond the showroom.
Jack began receiving invitations to speak at conferences and events, where he shared his father's story as a lesson in leadership and humanity. At one such event, he stood before a packed auditorium and said, "My father taught me that success is not about what you have, but about who you are. It's about how you treat others, especially those who may not look like they belong. If we can all remember that, the world will be a better place." The audience erupted in applause, moved by his words. Back at home, David continued his quiet, simple life. But now, when he sat in his garden or walked through his neighborhood, people would stop to greet him, their faces filled with admiration. "You're an inspiration, Mr. David," one neighbor said. David would smile and nod, always humble, always gracious. For him, the greatest reward wasn't the recognition or the admiration. It was knowing that his story had made a difference, that it had reminded people of the importance of respect, dignity, and the true measure of a person's worth. And as he sat by the window one evening, watching the sun set over the horizon, he felt a deep sense of peace. He had lived a life of hard work and sacrifice, but he had also lived a life of meaning. In the end, that was all that mattered. Months had passed since the day David and Jack walked out of the Rolls-Royce showroom. The incident, which had initially left David feeling humiliated, had since transformed into something far greater than either of them could have imagined. What began as a moment of judgment and disrespect had grown into a story that inspired thousands, a story that reminded people of the importance of dignity, perseverance, and the true measure of a person's worth. David's life, however, remained as simple as ever. He still woke up early every morning to tend to his garden, still enjoyed his tea by the window, and still found joy in the small, quiet moments of life. The Rolls-Royce Phantom, which Jack had eventually purchased for him as a gift, now sat in the garage of their modest home. But to David, the car wasn't a symbol of wealth or status. It was a reminder of the journey he had taken, the values he had lived by, and the love and respect his son had for him. One sunny morning, David sat in his usual spot by the window, sipping his tea and watching the world go by. The neighborhood children were playing in the street, their laughter echoing through the air. It was a peaceful scene, one that reminded David of the simple joys of life. Jack arrived shortly after, carrying a folder of documents under his arm. He had just returned from the city, where his work as a CEO kept him busy. But no matter how demanding his schedule was, Jack always made time to visit his father. These visits were sacred to him, a chance to reconnect, to listen to his father's stories, and to learn from the man he admired most. "Dad," Jack said, setting the folder down on the table. "I've been thinking about something and I wanted to get your opinion." David looked up from his tea, his expression curious. "What is it, son?" Jack sat down across from his father, his eyes bright with excitement. "I want to take your story, the story of what happened at the showroom, and turn it into something bigger. I want to start a foundation in your name to help people like you, hard-working, humble people who've been overlooked or underestimated. I want to give them opportunities to change their lives, to show the world their true worth." David was silent for a moment, his eyes glistening with emotion. He set his tea down and looked at his son with pride. "Jack," he said softly, "I don't need recognition or fame. I've lived my life quietly, and I'm happy with that. But if you think this foundation can help others, then I'll support you." Jack smiled, reaching across the table to take his father's hand. "Dad, this isn't about recognition. It's about honoring the values you've lived by: hard work, humility, and respect. It's about making sure no one else has to feel the way you did that day." A few months later, the Resilience Foundation was officially launched. Its mission was simple but powerful: to support hard-working individuals and families who had been overlooked or underestimated. The foundation provided scholarships for children, vocational training for adults, and financial assistance for those in need. David's story became the heart of the foundation's message. It was shared at events, in interviews, and on social media, inspiring countless people to reflect on their own values and how they treated others. One day, Jack invited David to attend the opening of a new vocational training center funded by the foundation. The center was located in a struggling community where many people were eager for opportunities to improve their lives. When David and Jack arrived, they were greeted with applause. David, dressed in his usual simple attire, felt a bit overwhelmed by the attention. But as he looked around at the smiling faces of the people the foundation was helping, he felt a deep sense of fulfillment. Jack took the stage to deliver a speech. "Today," he began, "I want to tell you about a man who has been my greatest teacher, my greatest inspiration, and my greatest hero. That man is my father." The room fell silent as Jack continued. "My father is not a man of wealth or luxury. He is a man of hard work, sacrifice, and love. He spent his entire life working tirelessly to give me opportunities he never had. He taught me that true success isn't about what you have, it's about who you are. It's about how you treat others, especially those who may not look like they belong." Jack paused, his eyes finding his father in the front row. "This foundation, this center, everything we're doing today, it all started with the lessons my father taught me. And I hope that through these efforts, we can honor his values and help others achieve their dreams." The audience erupted into applause, many of them moved to tears. David sat quietly, his eyes glistening with pride and gratitude. After the event, a man approached David. He was dressed in work clothes, his hands rough and calloused from years of labor. "Mr. David," the man said, his voice trembling, "I just wanted to thank you. Your story gave me hope. I used to think I'd never have a chance to change my life. But because of your foundation, I've been able to learn a new trade. Now I can provide for my family." David placed a hand on the man's shoulder, his voice gentle. "It's not me you should thank," he said. "It's your own resilience and determination that changed your life. Never forget that."
That evening, back at home, David and Jack sat together in the garden, watching the sun set.
The sky was painted in hues of orange and pink, and the air was filled with the soft chirping of crickets. "Jack," David said, breaking the silence, "I don't need a Rolls-Royce to feel proud. The greatest achievement of my life is you. You're the reason I've worked so hard, and seeing the man you've become is all the reward I'll ever need." Jack turned to his father, his voice thick with emotion. "And you, Dad, are the reason I am who I am. Everything I've achieved, everything I've done, it's all because of you."
The two men sat in silence for a while, their bond stronger than ever.
The Rolls-Royce Phantom sat quietly in the garage, but its significance had long since transcended its material value. It was no longer just a car, it was a symbol of a father's love, a son's gratitude, and the enduring power of respect and resilience. David's story had touched countless lives, but for him, the greatest victory was knowing that he had lived a life of meaning, a life that had inspired others to see the true worth in themselves and in those around them. As the stars began to twinkle in the night sky, David closed his eyes, a peaceful smile on his face. He had lived a good life, and he knew that his legacy would live on, not in the car, not in the foundation, but in the hearts of those he had touched.